Sterling Heights Public Library. My name is Brent, and guess what? It's strawberry season. We're going to make jam today. So we'll go over some ingredients here. And the three major ones that we're going to be dealing with, strawberries, sugar, and pectin. Now you're going to notice that I've got two different boxes here. They're two different colors. That's because this is a full on sugar one, and this is the low sugar variety. Pay attention to which one you've got because the instructions and the proportions are a little bit different. We're going to be using the low sugar one today. I've also got a little bit of fruit fresh. This is optional, but I like it. And a little bit of butter. Also optional, but it's handy. Now, a little bit of about strawberries. These here are store-bought. They're beautiful. They're huge. They're fine for a lot of things. They're not your best choice for jam, but right now, they're what I've got. Most of what's in this bowl here is frozen sliced ones. So these work great too. But if you've got the option, and about the middle of June should be when fresh berries are available locally, get the local ones. And when you're taking care of these things, don't refrigerate them. Use them the day you get them. Wash them immediately before you're going to use them. Don't wash them and let them sit around. So these have already been washed. I'm just going to show you how to take the caps off of these. Just get a paring knife in there and just take the top off. If you got a little bit of core in there, you can just kind of go in there and take that out. They also make a little thing called a strawberry capper, which works pretty well too. And then you can just take these things, and we don't need to cut them up into real small pieces. We're just going to knock them down into halves or quarters because we're going to crush these things. And they're going to break down nicely. So I've got, there's about 3 quarts of berries there right now. Once these are all crushed up, we're going to pay attention to the instructions that come with this. So we've got some equipment here. Now some of this stuff is standard, and some of this stuff is stuff you might not have laying around the house if you haven't done any canning before. Let's go over a few of these things. We've got some canning jars here. I've got some pints and some half pints. What size you use is up to you, but make sure that you prep enough jars for the size batch that you're making. And when you open this little box, you're going to find that inside is a recipe instruction here that is going to give you proportions and instructions for how to make different jams with different fruits. I have the bands and lids that go along with these jars. I've got some labels. Now these are optional. You don't need to use these, but they are handy. You actually can write on the top of these things here with a magic marker. I've got a ladle. We're going to come to, this is going to be very useful here. A rubber spatula or wooden spoon is going to be good. A couple of measuring cups and spoons are very nice. You may find yourself needing a small spoon to, just taste and stir with. A paring knife is really handy, especially if you've got to do any quartering on those. I mentioned a strawberry capper. This is a strawberry capper, and this basically, you just use those little teeth and just dig that cap right out of there. This works great for coring tomatoes as well, so that's a handy little tool. And I have one of the more important things you're going to need is a canning funnel. Now you can see that this has a much wider neck on it than most funnels. This is very, very useful when you're putting anything in jars. Some sort of small bowl is good, and we're going to be using a potato masher as well. You could get away with a stick blender, or you could just chop the fruit by hand if you want to, but this comes in really, really useful. So one of the first steps in here, we're going to take a 1/4 cup of the sugar. You want to measure all of your sugar very carefully. This particular one, we're using the low sugar again. It's going to require 4 cups of sugar. So we take a 1/4 cup of that sugar. We're going to take the entire envelope of the pectin mix, and I'm using a little fruit fresh today, so we're going to take about a tablespoon of that left in there, which is just about what we needed anyway. So there's that, and we're just going to stir that gently to combine it. That just helps everything. dissolve more evenly. So I'm going to set that aside for a second. And while we're at it, I put those strawberries in this pan. This is not hot yet. We haven't started cooking anything yet. I'm going to take the potato masher and I'm just going to crush these berries, because if you want real precise measurements on fruit, the best thing to do is eliminate all the air pockets. And the easiest way to do that is to crush it. Then we're going to measure it and make sure that we have the appropriate amount of fruit, because too much or too little will cause your jam to not turn out correctly. It doesn't need to be completely mashed to a paste. So we're just going to get that kind of squashed down, and I'm going to measure that into my large measure here. I'm try and avoid splashing this too much, because let's face it, strawberries stain. There's a reason I'm not wearing a white shirt when doing this. Wiggle here. And that comes out to a little bit more than 6 cups. So, and 6 cups is what the instructions call for. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that out of there, bring her down to 6. Yep, perfect. So we'll come back to this in a moment and I'll show you how to put it together. We've moved over to the stove, and I got 2 things going on here right now. I've got that large pan, which we're going to need for making the jam. The bigger the pan, the better, because not only are you going to get more heat surface for this, but also when this stuff starts to boil, it's going to foam a little bit. You don't want it boiling all over your stove. And I've also got a small saucepan with some water in it back here that we're going to use for sterilizing our lids. We'll talk about that here in a second. So we've got our 6 cups of crushed berries are going in here. And then we've got that little bit of pectin with that 1/4 cup of sugar and that little bit of fruit fresh. So we're going to put that together, turn on the heat, and just stir that together. And you don't want to walk away from this. It is going to take a little while for it to come up to a boil. But don't walk too far away from this stuff, because you do not want this scorching and you do not want it all over your stove. It does help to have a good size space to work with in order to, because you got a couple of things going on here. And also, it does recommend using about a 1/2 teaspoon of butter or a little bit of oil in this. That helps actually prevent foaming on this and keep that down a little bit. So with the water back here, we're going to take these lids and we're going to toss them in there. Now, it's not just to sterilize them. It'll tell you it's to sterilize them, but there's also, see this little rubber ring around the edge here? You want to make sure that that's soft as well, because that's going to help form your seal. If that's not softened, it won't work as well. So we're just going to toss those in here one at a time. Now our mixture is starting to come up to a little bit of a simmer here. What we're looking for is a full rolling boil. So you want the heat on this thing cranked up pretty good. You can start off a little on the low side, but once you get to the point where you've got everything mixed together, crank that heat up, stay right with it, and stir it. Now when it says a full rolling boil, what that means is that you want a boil that is going to continue to bubble even while you're stirring it. When we get to that point, we'll show you what that looks like. I do want to touch real quickly on the point of the fruit fresh, because I don't think I mentioned that. It does 2 things. It's got some citrus and ascorbic acid in it, and that actually bumps up the acidity of the product a little bit, which is going to kind of brighten up the flavor. It also helps to protect the color. So you're going to get a brighter, more vibrant color out of it if you use a little bit of that fruit fresh. Helps it maintain its color a little bit longer too, because strawberry jam, interestingly enough, starts to lose its freshness a little bit after, only about 6 months. It's still perfectly edible and still tastes good, but it's one that you really want to go through relatively quickly. we're just coming up to that full rolling boil we were talking about. And you can see that even though I'm stirring it, it is still bubbling. So what we're going to do here, we're going to go ahead and dump the rest of the sugar in all at once. And stir that in while maintaining the heat. We want to make sure all that sugar dissolves. And adding that is going to increase the boiling temperature significantly. And you're going to see that it's going to change the way that the mixture looks a little bit too. It's going to all of a sudden go a little bit translucent. And it's going to take a few minutes for that to come back up to that full rolling boil, but once it does, we're going to set a timer. We're going to go for exactly a minute at that full rolling boil. So if you've got a power boil feature on your stove, this is a great time to use it. While I'm stirring this, I do want to touch on one more thing as well. The instructions that you're going to find on the jam packet are going to tell you to boil your jars in order to sterilize them. Boiling a number of jars is actually going to require a huge pot, and it's kind of a pain in the butt. If you want to sterilize your jars an easy way, if you've got a dishwasher, put them in there, run it. Do it, just before you're planning on doing this, so that they come out of there and they're nice and clean and they're nice and hot. That works really, really well. And probably a good idea. You'll see a yield on the recipe. It's never a bad idea to prep at least one more jar than you think you're actually going to need. Sometimes you wind up with just a little bit more than you expect. Also, along those lines, buy a little bit more fruit than you think you might need. Anything left over, you can certainly eat, but it's a real bummer to come up short and not have things. See how that's gone all translucent like that? Totally changes the way it looks. And if I wanted to really break up those pieces a little bit more, I can run that potato masher in there again. But we're going to leave this a little on the chunky side. We are just starting to come up to that full rolling boil we talked about. So while I'm stirring this, I am going to set my timer for 1 minute and get that going. I'm going to keep stirring this the entire time. This does a couple of different things. One of them is it makes sure that every little bit of that sugar is fully dissolved and melted. It brings your temperature way up, which helps with sealing your jars. And one thing you want to really watch, and this is where one of the places the butter comes in handy, is it does help to reduce the foaming a little bit, because I don't know if you can see that real well, but the amount of bubbles that are running in this, the whole level of this is coming up in the pan a little bit. We do not want that to boil all over the stove, so we don't walk away from it even for a second at this stage. And we're coming up on that 1 minute mark. So there it is right there. Go ahead, turn the heat off. I'm going to bring this over to the counter, and we are going to start jarring this stuff up. So we're going to go ahead and jar this up right now. So I'm going to start with one of these nice clean jars. I've got my canning funnel in here. We're going to take the ladle and just plop that right on in there. This stuff is still outrageously hot. You can see the steam coming off of it. You do not want to splash this stuff on yourself. It will hurt. And you do not want to take the jars all the way to the very tippy top. Leave a little bit of headspace in there, a little bit of air. So come up to about where the just below the threads, and that will give you enough room for the air to contract as it cools, and that is going to help form your steel. So I'm going to reach into my pan of hot water back here, pull out one of these lids, make sure you've got the right size lid for the right size jar, set that on top gently, and then go ahead and get your band on there. Now do be careful, because this stuff is very hot and the jars are very hot. You might need a towel, or there we go, towel or a hot mitt to handle these jars unless you are pretty fireproof. And we're just going to go ahead and cap a couple more of these. You don't need to snug these down super tight at this stage. You can always tighten them down a little bit more later, but just take that lid straight out of the water, right on, and just finger tight. And sometimes you'll find that a couple of these lids will stick together when they've got the water between them. Be very careful when you're doing that, because that water that's between there, if it comes out of there on you quick, you can burn yourself. So this is one of those things you want to be careful with. And when these things here are ready to seal, you'll actually hear them. So the button on the top will go down. I got everything jarred up, and my camera crew was nice enough to make me some nice labels. It's nice to be able to do these while they're on the strip still before you put them on here. It's a lot easier to write on them like this. Put what's in there and at least the year, probably the month as well on there that you're doing this. That way you can keep track of it. Not only is it delicious, makes nice gifts. I remember that the instructions were telling us that we were going to get a yield of about 8 cups. We got closer to 9 on this. So that's one of the places where it's handy to prep at least 1 extra jar, because you might need it. You can see that this stuff, as it starts to cool, has set up very nicely. We've got good consistency on this. I've tasted it. It's delicious. And this is what they sound like when they get ready to seal. You're going to hear a very distinct, with the finger on there, you can't really get the full sound because it's going to make kind of a ping when it goes. But you'll hear it. But it's kind of like that, but louder. And you want to use nice new lids when you're doing something like this here. If you're just storing something in the fridge, you can reuse a lid. But if you're sealing something, use fresh lids. Don't reuse lids if you're sealing anything. Once your jars are all sealed, take a few moments and while they're still warm, but make sure that they're sealed fully. Make sure you wipe the threads on these things and double check the insides of the lids to make sure you don't have any jam on the threads. And then just snug them down good while they're still warm. You don't really want to leave jam on the threads, because not only will it attack the bands a little bit, you'll see a little bit of corrosion on them. Also, it makes it really hard to open if you've got jam on the threads. So just something to keep in mind.